Well, good morning, Walter.
Good morning, Ed.
Thanks for inviting me over to your balcony here. We're in a lovely, it's a cloudy day, but we got the sunshine of our smiles.
It's my pleasure to have you, neighbor.
That's wonderful. Remembrance Day is coming up, and I've been looking for a veteran, and I realized that if I was going to find somebody that was serving in the war, they would have to be 97 years old or upwards of that for active duty. And but your name came up as having had some military service. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was peacetime. I've checked with the Veterans Affairs, and they said yes, I was in the service, I can be called a veteran. So now I say there's war veterans and there's regular veterans. I was just a peacetime veteran, so I wanted to fly, and I knew of a school friend of mine who was he worked for the telephone company. He says, I'm in the Air Force, I'm flying on the weekends. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm with the 402 Reserve Squadron. I said, oh, we got a reserve squadron in Winnipeg. I'll check it out. And yeah, I could join up, and they would sponsor me, and I'd have to take regular Air Force training. So I had 4 or 5, 6 years with the CBC at this point. I didn't want to lose my civilian job. But someone said, well, there's the Veterans Benefit Act. It was a government act that employers had to release employees for military service, and they wouldn't lose their civilian employment. So I checked it out, and I went to 402 Squadron. They were called the Fighter Squadron then, with 17 wing in Winnipeg here. They were flying Mustangs, P-51 Mustangs. And some group captain or wing commander interviewed me and said, yeah, we can sign you up for a course. You'd have to go down east and learn how to fly.
Yes.
So yeah, they accepted me, and this was 1955. I went to London, Ontario, they sent me to a PSU bracket O, Personnel Selection Unit Officers. And we had about 100 and so odd young people there, and we weren't called cadets yet, I don't think. Anyway, we were going through a selection process. And then from there, they selected us, and 10% or so didn't even make it through PSUO.
Right.
And then 30 miles away was Centralia, an Air Force base, pre-flight school. And we started there, and then they sort of worked us into groups. Either you're going to be a pilot or you're going to be a navigator, depending on your skills or knowledge at the time. And I found it pretty tough because I only had a grade 11 education, and these kids that I'm vying with, they were all university, educated. Anyway, yeah, I went through the pre-flight school and made it through and graduated. And then they sent the pilots. I was selected for the pilot group. They went to Moose Jaw for pilot training.
Right.
The navigators, they were sent to, I think it was Gimli. They learned their navigation skills in Gimli, and then we went through a long time without even being inside an aircraft. I think it was about 6 weeks or so before I saw the inside of a Harvard.
Right.
And that's how.
So what did you eventually end up? What was the most advanced type that you ended up flying?
After this is pre-flight school, we got that was a Harvard.
Yeah, that was the trainer.
That was a terrible machine for people to learn on, but it was very, very difficult. But they used to have a saying, Ed, if you could fly a Harvard, you could fly anything. And so after that pre-flight school, you had to go to advanced flying school. And I was fortunate enough that Portage-la-Prairie, which is 50 miles from my hometown of Winnipeg,
Yeah.
and I was close to home. A lot of my buddies were from Nova Scotia and BC and all over, but I was the only one from Winnipeg in my course.
Right.
So I had a lot of friends coming into Winnipeg on days off. We shared time together.
Good, good.
But yeah, so then at Portage-la-Prairie for advanced flying, it was a T-33 jet. Well, that was a pretty big deal, flying a jet. And it was a lot easier than the Harvard. The Harvard was a
Well-
combination of 20 things you had to do.
I can-
With the jet, it was just a throttle, 60%, 100% go.
I can tell you a
A
little
throttle
bit,
and a joystick.
I can tell you a little bit about my experience because I was in 677 Air Cadet Squadron in Russell, Manitoba,
Right.
when I was in high school. And so we would go down to rivers to have these camps and things like that. And I actually got to fly second seat in a T-33 jet.
Did you really? So you
And that
were-
was the thrill of a lifetime. So
I
I know
bet.
what you're talking about. When you put that throttle
Yeah.
to the wall, that thing just jumps.
Were you in the front seat
I
or
was in the back seat.
back seat?
That was enough for me.
enough.
But, so anyway, so it was T-33s you were flying?
Yes, yeah. A lot of the guys didn't make, go back to initial flying. They didn't feel because they couldn't fly, but some were constantly airsick. They were allergic to flying.
Not a good
And they-
symptom,
yeah.
not a good quality
Not a
for a
good-
flyer.
And that was a sad thing to see some of your buddies go, every time they went up, they got sick. Well, you can't become a pilot.
So learning to be a pilot was a definite challenge because some people physically couldn't take it. But you had other challenges too. What happened?
My challenge was with the difficulty of the Harvard. And when I thought, I'm gonna fly, it's just you give her the gas and you play with the joystick. It was more than that. There was variable pitch, there was lean mixture, rich mixture, carburetor heat, open your gills, close your gills. And I was not a mechanic, mechanically inclined. And my instructor said at one point to do him a favor, do the Air Force a favor, do myself a favor. He says, why don't you CT? Well, that's military term for cease training. And the thought of quitting and going back to my friends at CBC and saying, oh, I failed, here I am again. It wasn't a good idea, so I dug in and I memorized that checklist a little bit more, and I ended up, the next Monday morning, I soloed the first one in our group, so he lit a fire under my belly.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Anybody was
That's
doing.
wonderful. That gives you a lot of grit.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So did you do much flying? Did you get a lot of hours in over the years?
After with the Air Force, when I came back to my squadron, when I got my wings in Portage la Prairie, the next step was to report to my squadron.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my squadron was civilian life with 402, and they were a fighter squadron flying P-51 Mustangs. And so now I'm back at the CBC with my civilian job, and Thursdays and Saturdays and Sundays was parade night for 402 Squadron. And before I could fly the P-51, having come off T-33 jets now, I had to transition from jets to piston. So now there's always a 10-hour transition period when you go from piston to jet, jet to piston. So we had a Harvard there, which was the piston, along with the Mustangs. And so I had to get 10 hours back in the Harvard again, and then write the course for the P-51.
Mhm.
You had to pass the test to write a test on it. The P-51 was a single seater. Your first trip is solo. So I had done all that, and I was all set. I went out one day, ready to. Had my 10 hours in the Harvard for the transition, and I go to do my solo with the P-51, and they're all wrapped up in tarps, and they're ready to be shipped out to Mexico or someplace.
Oh.
402 was changing from a fighter squadron to a transport squadron. No more Mustangs. So that was the end of the.
You didn't get to fly the B-51?
Nope.
What a shame.
By one day.
That was the hottest propeller fighter of World War II. 450 miles an hour.
450 miles an hour. 12 cylinders. It was all engine. was all engine. Anyway, it was a blessing in disguise, Ed, because what happened next was they brought in C-45s, twin engines. So now they taught all the reserve squadron, all the 402 pilots had to go for training. We went to Saskatoon for, I can't remember, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, to learn twin engine time.
Was that the equivalent of the DC-3?
Yeah, yeah.
C-47?
Yeah, the
Whatever.
Expediter was another name for it.
Yeah.
C-45.
Okay,
And so we spent a few weeks in Saskatoon learning that, and that was the benefit of now I had multi-engine time.
so did you ever think of becoming a commercial pilot?
I thought my career with the CBC was pretty fun. It was a good career.
Mhm,
I was
mhm.
a sound technician, and yes, I thought it would be great to be an airline pilot. So I applied to CP Air at the time. I thought it might be easier than Trans-Canada Air. It wasn't Air Canada then.
Yeah, right?
TCA.
TCA?
So I applied to CPA, Canadian Pacific, and I got a letter back from them. They said, our present course is filled, but feel free to reapply. And I never did, so that was the end of my airline idea.
So I've been reading quite a few stories about World War II and the pilots and so on. And a little ironic thing that I found out was the pilots who were the aces in the war had the hardest time to get the jobs as commercial pilots because the airline thought they were just a little bit too hot and a little bit too eager to take risks.
That might have been.
So I thought that was kind of
That's
interesting
interesting.
how it could backfire.